Here's a weird question for you. Are you feeling burned out and overwhelmed by your own success? I have worked with over 1,000 practices, and in my own experience, I remember the days of being so busy that I never had a minute to myself. Do you ever find that where the patient line is long, your team is running around the practice with their hair on fire, and you had that surreal moment where you're like, when am I ever going to have time for the things I want to do? There's nothing worse than being a young father that I was newly married with kids and I wanted to be at their activities, but I never had time. I couldn't step away from the practice. It was getting so busy that I was drowning in my own success. And if that's you, I'm going to give you the 3 things that if you will take action on, you will find freedom in your life again. And so let's dive in. If you're a doc that has no experience making data-driven decisions, don't fear, you're in the right place. In fact, I'm going to share with you a formula that's actually going to help you double your profits. And then I'm going to go into, there's 3 types of practices, and which one are you, and really where do you want to be, and what kind of practice do you want to scale and grow? And you're going to want to stick around to the end because I'm going to give you a killer strategy of how to free yourself from this crazy grind and actually buy back your time. All right, welcome guys to this video. We are going to dive into the very first tip, which is how to double those profits. And we do it with what's called your double your profits formula. And this is the formula that applies to every practice. I don't care if you're a very straight chiropractic practice, if you're an integrated practice, if you're a small practice, or you've got multiple locations. This formula will change your life. And we start the formula with the end of the formula, which is equal profits. You've really got to sit down and intentionally set the volume of profits that you want to generate from this practice. We kind of work backwards in the formula by starting with that because you're building a vehicle that generates profits. It's like gas in the tank. If you're going to take a trip to the moon, you don't just head to the moon. You don't jump in the rocket. You sit down and you calculate exactly how much fuel you needed in the tank to actually make it to the moon. And you need to know what those profits are, both short-term and long-term. We then work backwards in the formula, and we're going to now go back to the beginning, which is visits. Your visits have value, and there's different visits within the practice, everything from new patient visits to report of findings to patient treatments and re-exams and progress exams and conversion visits where we're now trying to move a patient through their programs. And there's really 2 different models within that practice around visits. It's either low value, high volume, or high value, low volume. What kind of practice are you, and what services are being delivered on each visit to make those visits the most value that they can, because visits then get multiplied times what we call adjusted production per visit. This is production, the value of the visit. If I go to a restaurant and I sit down and order a meal, it has a price applied to it. And if I pay anything less than that price, the restaurant isn't going to be happy with me. And why are we allowing ourselves to deliver services to patients without explaining the value of those services and collecting for that value? So production gets adjusted by discounts, and because we live in this crazy world of insurance or different discounts that we apply to those visits, we have to adjust for those. So adjusted production is now the realistic value. If I have a coupon for that meal at the restaurant and I give them a coupon and I pay the difference, we now have full exchange. And that's what's happening in your practice. You're delivering services for a value of what you expect to collect. That's the number that we want to know. We want to know to the penny, what should you be collecting for each one of those visits? And on average, what are you collecting per visit? How do we move that up? By focusing back on what type of visits we're seeing the most of. How do we increase the most valuable visits in the practice? We now multiply that towards the 3rd component of the formula, the double your profits formula, which is what % of that adjusted production per visit are we collecting? That adjusted production per visit is a number that we're chasing. We either collect that money up front from the patient or we actually have a billing cycle. What % of that are you collecting? Really healthy practices are collecting 96, 97, 98, up to 100% of that adjusted production. But if you're only collecting 70%, 80%, your team is doing all this work, but you're not collecting enough of that work for everybody to get paid fairly. And so we have this gap of work value return to feed the fuel of the profits. And now your profit margins are so small, no wonder why you can't afford to hire and scale. You try to grow, but there's no money to reinforce the team to grow. And that's why you keep hitting your head. The fourth component of the formula is now minusing your actual overhead. Do you know your overhead? Are you actually analyzing that? And this is the power of what we call a profit dashboard. We build dashboards for practices where it pulls in your QuickBooks data and displays your exact overhead in real time. How cool is that, to be able to see your expenditures, your DME, your purchases, your supplements, your supplies, and when you can really make sure that each category of payroll and these different categories are within the proper margins, then we know we're moving overhead into a healthy place. And we now have enough profits to scale, to grow, to reinvest in the practice. So to revisit this, we have visits times adjusted production per visit times what percent of that adjusted production are we collecting minus the overhead equals the profits. And when you get laser focused and intentional about really moving each lever of that formula, you now are welcoming into the community of data-driven docs. You're not a drifter, this drifting doc that isn't aware of their overhead. They're not aware of the value of their visits. They're not even aware of how much are we actually collecting of our services. And make sure you stick around with me to the end of this video, because I'm going to show you the wrong way to set up your practice, and you are not going to want to make that mistake. Skip that and accelerate the success of your practice. And you'll thank me later. My tip number 2 is being so clear on what type of practice you're building. And there's really 3 types, as we've built now a community of thousands of practices that are so passionate about running their practice by the numbers that they fall into these 3 categories. And the first one is what we call a cash flow practice. A cash flow practice is where the practice owner is typically the doctor, the provider providing the services. And they're able to keep their overhead pretty low because they're doing most of the work. But what we find with those practices is that this is more of a job. If they leave the practice, there is no cash flow. The cash flow stops because the practice has to close because the provider is gone. And it still provides a very good lifestyle. You're pulling most of the cash out of the practice to fund a lifestyle. And that's our cash flow practice. Practice number 2 is what we call the skeleton sell it. This is where we have some entrepreneur docs that really like to start a practice cycle, but they don't want to run a practice long term. They like being able to grow value, turn around and sell that value, have now a chunk of money to go wash, rinse, and repeat, and do that multiple times. Those docs definitely need to know their numbers, and they are using our systems to really create the most value within those practices. Practice number 3 is what we call the Dominator. This is a practice that really wants to become a brand, a practice that is driven by a team where data is automated, and we have very intentional reinvestment into the practice to grow to become the number 1 practice within its community, to either grow multiple providers or multiple locations. And this practice has to know their numbers. You cannot scale a practice. You cannot dominate a market without knowing your numbers. You've got to be so clear on these levers and these very specific margins that have to be in place to scale that practice. And that's why our Dominators are growing fast, because this is a group of doctors who are very clear on the impact that they want to make within their community and within our profession. So before I go into tip number 3, I just got to ask you this question. Are you in, or are you just nibbling on the edges of this content? Do you want to be a part of this community? Because if you do, you got to hit the like button, you got to hit the notifications and turn it on so you get notified every time we release an incredible video helping you on your journey to becoming a data-driven practice. So like and subscribe, and then don't be selfish, right? Share this with your friends. Let's build this community and unify our profession, because we're a data-driven nation and we are here to change the world. All right, guys, tip number 3 is about how to free yourself into the success of your practice rather than being sucked into your practice. And this is all about building a brand, but How do we do that? And I want to give you a strategy that literally will change everything in your practice, because most of your patient testimonials are probably talking about you, the difference you made in their lives. They're naming you. They're talking about how grateful they are for you. And I get that. Like, that feels good. It feels very significant. I'm changing lives. But the problem is that when patients hear that, their friends, their community, their family, they want to come in and see you. Instead of doing that, what I want you to do is work with your patients and delivering their testimonials, ask them intentionally to switch your name with your brand name, your practice name, or your method that you've created, your USP, your unique selling proposition that your practice offers that just can't be accessed in the community other than coming to your practice. By your patients being confident in the practice brand, then if we interchange providers or team members, it doesn't break the system. The confidence is being built in the name of your practice, the system of your healthcare, and that's what we want to build in the community. That one simple tweak will now change your messaging into your community, and patients will seek out your brand rather than you as the provider. This frees you. This now means that you don't have to be the treating physician. You can start building other providers, confidence in these providers to your patient base, which means now you can shift to work more on the practice rather than in the practice. And that is freedom. This is an incredible opportunity for you to take this and become a dominator. If you want to be the dominator practice, this is such a key step. If you want to stay at the cash flow practice, then don't do this step. But if you're truly ready to dominate your community, to become the premier brand within your community, the #1 resource to holistic healthcare, then take my tip and put it into place, because you will immediately see incredible results with this messaging change. So guys, I'm here for you, and I just need you to post in the comments below, what type of practice do you want to be? Are you a cash flow practice? Are you a skeleton sell it? Or are you a dominator? Post in the comments below. I want to hear it. I want to support you in your dreams, in your journey. In fact, if you're really ready to get serious about this, I want you to click the link below and sign up for our Turn Your Data into Dollars challenge. It's a 10-day challenge where you have the opportunity to join live sessions with me, where I will answer all of your questions on what are the numbers you should be tracking, how can we use organic traffic to actually scale your practice to become the dominator, how can we test your messaging and improve that messaging where you are creating attraction for your ideal new patients. So click the link below. I'll see you on the inside.